All right, welcome everyone to a very special bonus episode of the Winning the Challenger Sales Series. We're joined by a very special guest today. Matt Dixon is with us. Matt, of course, the co-author of The Challenger Sale, The Challenger Customer, and The Effortless Experience, and currently Chief Product and Research Officer at Tether. Matt, thanks for joining us. How you been?
Yeah, been great. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure as always, and yeah, it's always great to have a chat with you guys. Hear what you're seeing in the, what's going on in the market, and what the new research is suggesting bestsellers are doing around that.
Likewise, we spoke a year and a half ago. We set up a couple of webinars that we ran with Spence Wixom over on our side, and this was in the spring, getting right into the first wave of the pandemic and thinking about how this is all going to play out and trying to prognosticate. I think we learned 18 months later we just can't predict anything, but what we saw coming were a few major disruptions to B2B buying and selling. And I think over the last 18 months, we've seen a lot of the things we talked about last year play out. But this conversation, we can touch on some of those, but what I really wanted to do here in sort of the same vein as what we've been doing with Winning the Challenger Sale is just get as tactical as possible.
Yep.
Right. I think walking through some of the more sort of tangible but acute and pervasive pain points that reps themselves tend to encounter or deal with on a day-to-day basis, really get your perspective, hear what you're seeing, hear what you'd recommend folks try, just your observations as much as ours here at Challenger would be great to chat on today. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Cool. So Jen and I were talking a little bit about some of the things we wanted to pick your brain on. One of the first things I think we're seeing, and I know it's something that you're also passionate about and you're seeing, is this idea of a lot of no decision pipeline coming through, right? And when we talk about no decision, what we're referring to here is close lost, and that decision didn't happen. They actually didn't go with a competitor. They chose not to choose effectively. And I think back to the big finding from your original research from the Challenger Sale, over a decade ago now. That was we just refer to it affectionately as the 57%, right? Customers were delaying their engagement to the point where they were 57% of the way through the buying journey before they ever engaged a sales rep. This data point that we found recently was 38%. Customers are actually going through purchase journeys, and 38% of the time, those purchase journeys end in no decision.
Yep.
And so we think this is a huge issue. I know you think it's a huge issue. As somebody who's been living in this world of customer decision-making for a long time, lifelong researcher, what's behind all this, and what can we potentially do about it?
Yeah, I think you're right. So we were doing our own research. It was funny because when we shared notes or compared notes on this this trend we're seeing of deals ending in no decision, we actually, through a totally independent site, found the same number, about 38%.
It's amazing, honestly.
Yeah, it was. I did a double take and sent it to some research colleagues of mine, and I was like, did we talk to these guys? This is weird. The same exact thing. But it is a huge deal, and I think there's a lot of things going on here. I'd be curious to hear what you and Jen are hearing from your clients and what you're seeing out in the market. But I'll just start and suggest what I think might be going on here. So a few things. One is, so there's still quite a bit of risk aversion. I think we know that. We saw this back when we wrote the original book, Challenger Sale, that customers were pushing out time horizons. They were dragging their heels, and I think part of that is a function of where we are in time. That nobody wants to be the person who makes a big big purchase decision on a significant investment for their company, and then have this economy, this market, this world take a dramatic hairpin turn. And let's be honest, Mike, as you said before, like, nobody can predict anything. I think that much we've determined is true. And so in that world, making a big outlay for a significant purchase is something that, like, nobody wants to sign up for. They're happy to be a part of the buying committee and say they're on board, but they don't want their name on the contract, right? So I think there's that. I think it's just a function of the current economic environment. But I would say, I think, even when it was interesting because we saw something similar with that 57%. And I think what we found is after the financial crisis, and I'm really dating myself, but after the financial crisis subsided and the economy started kind of roaring back, that phenomenon didn't go away. And I actually think that phenomenon of no decision is not going to go away either. and I hate to be a downer, but I think there's something kind of more, if you will, more nefarious at work. I think one of the things that's happening to a lot of sellers is they're ending up with these opportunities that have been nurtured through content marketing. They've been engaged out, where the customer's learning for, a forum like this one, right? The Winning the Challenger Sales series, podcasts, white papers, webinars, LinkedIn discussions, et cetera. And they're learning on their own. We already knew that. But they're also, it's not just that they're kind of self-learning, they're almost like self-qualifying in some way. And so they're opting into the funnel, and they engage with the salesperson in a much later state. But what's interesting is there's still a lot there's a reason that customers still reached out to the salesperson, wants to have a conversation. And so I think that sellers today aren't equipped to deal with a lot of the things that are causing customers to get cold feet late in the game. I think a lot of those deals, again, or those opportunities are entering the funnel, and they're very different kind of opportunity than the ones we used to generate 10 years ago through outbound cold calling. There's a lot of education. We're teaching the customer about the problem they didn't know they had. We're leading to our value proposition, all the things that we've talked about and written about for a long time. But what happens when that customer shows up and they already know there was a problem they didn't realize was out there? They already know the lead to. They know, you are a supplier uniquely positioned to solve that problem, and we still don't close them. Like, what is going on there? And I think it's some of it comes down to the fact that the customer's already we've already built up the intent, right? That's already there. What today's seller, I think, when they see that customer who starts to, hem and haw, they're sitting on the fence, they came into the funnel, they're hot, they loved our webinar, they love the Winning the Challenger Sales series, they love what we're talking about, they're bought into the problem and our value proposition, and then they start to get cold feet. I think today's seller kind of goes back to the well and just they keep hammering. Okay, so you must not fully appreciate the value proposition. Just let me hit you again with that. You must have missed the problem that you didn't know was out there. So let me show it to you again. And I don't think we're really solving for what's preventing that customer to move forward. And I think there's a lot of research and opportunity there, because I don't think this problem is going to go away. In fact, it might actually get worse, even after this kind of temporary, risk aversion subsides. When hopefully this pandemic is in the rearview mirror, the economy comes roaring back just like it did 10 years ago, and there's tons of money. I think you're still going to find people getting cold feet late in the game. And again, like you said, Mike, these are people who went through a whole buying process and probably told you at multiple points, I love you. I love what you're talking about. You totally rocked my world. I did not know this was a problem for us. I didn't realize it was as big as it is. I didn't realize this thing was connected to that thing. And I totally get that you can solve this for me. I want it. And then they still don't buy. So what's going on there? So I'll throw it back to you. I've got some ideas of what's going on there, but I'm curious what you guys are seeing, what you're hearing from customers. If all your customers are seeing the same phenomenon, I suspect there's probably a spread there. Some people probably aren't seeing it quite as much, but some people are seeing it way worse. I shared that 38% as an aside with a company the other day, and they said, I wish it was 38% for us. That would be like on a good day. They're seeing north of 50% washout.
Yep. Well, and I want to hear Jen's perspective, and Jen, we've talked about this. You're in the field right now. You are doing this. You are navigating these opportunities and these journeys, and you're seeing it firsthand. So I want to hear what you think. But one thing that Jen and I talked about recently was this idea that commercial kind of to your point, Matt, like instead of going back and hammering the same message and bringing that same insight that you created the opportunity with, or that you generated interest around speaking with on that first interaction, maybe that worked to a point, but we're still getting stuck in these mid to late stages. The idea that commercial teaching happens throughout the entire process. And when we talk about that, it's not just versioning the same message you used at the beginning. It's finding the next foothold for the next insight that's going to unstick an opportunity when it starts to get stuck. And it could be something dramatically different. But as you start managing these conversations and asking great questions and getting exposed to other stakeholders in the group, always be thinking about what's the kernel of insight that might pop at any moment that you can then take and run with and create some new urgency around. Because to your point, if the original message got you that opportunity, but it doesn't seem to always be closing that opportunity, what's changed in between? And do we need another teaching message to ultimately push to the next stage or through the next mile?
Yeah. I think I will throw out a couple of things, and then Jen, I want to hear your thoughts. But one thing that occurs to me is some of those opportunities probably should never have been in the pipeline to begin with. And so I think
Great
we
point.
talked about this a long time ago. I think we wrote about it back in the Challenger Customer, was this idea of the nail versus the wedge, right? And that your average performers see sales as a numbers game. They feed opportunities in, they go through the process. If the customer hasn't said no, then like hope springs eternal, because they might say yes. But I don't think that's, your high performers much more likely to find those indicators that this is going to end up in a no decision land. It's going to be a big waste of my time. And the high performer knows that time is their scarcest resource. And so they are aggressively disqualifying throughout. In that nail concept suggested, like, unlike the classic wedge shape, the high performer has a lot of opportunities up front, but they disqualify them aggressively, getting to a much smaller set of opportunities that they can really devote their time to. And so some of that speaks to, like, not what are disqualification criteria? What are we looking for, listening for? Are we actually looking and listening for things? Do we have happy ears and we're just, again, because the customer didn't say no, they could say yes. But recognizing that time really is your scarcest resource, and so make sure that you're weeding those out. Another one we'll talk about is the problem of consensus, right? It may be that that person was bought in, but we didn't rally the 5.4, the 6.8, whatever the number is today, of stakeholders out there. It continues to grow company by company. And it makes it much harder for us to win that consensus. Even if we got this one person bought in, they didn't get their colleagues bought in. And then the last one I throw out there, just as an idea, is the effort lens. And I know we don't talk about that a lot on the sales side. That's seen as a CX, customer experience side. But one of the things you guys will remember that drove loyalty and purchase preference was, is the supplier easy to do business with? And so there is an element here of, is the rep actually being a good commercial coach? Are they actually guiding the customer on not just what to buy, but how to buy, right? How to go through the purchase experience, or are they kind of leaving it up to the customer? You guys remember sort of oldie but goodie data point around how average performers are much more likely to ask the customer to coach them on how to sell to their company. So, Mike, if you're my customer, I'm going to go to you and say, Mike, I'm trying to sell this solution to Challenger. Can you, who holds the purse strings? Who should weigh in? Like, when do
where's my economic buyer?
Right. What are the stages? When do we have to get procurement involved? Does legal have to be involved? They have to, what's the spend threshold? Like, do we need a SEC review? Like, there are all these questions that I'm assuming you have the answer to, but you never buy my solution. This is the only time in your career you're ever going to buy anything like what I'm selling to you. And so I'm in a much better position to coach you on how to buy, not to ask you to coach me on how to sell. And so we know that too, and so I suspect that explains part of it too. And then that effort, that is part of reducing the effort of the buying experience for the customer, right? Let me be your Sherpa. Let me guide you through this, because buying complex B2B solutions is a pain. And it leads to that solutions graveyard we've talked about many times before. And let me be your guide through that wasteland, through that graveyard, get you to the other side. And how many of our sellers are actually actively coaching the customer on those things? Yep. So I think that's a little bit of what I would point to, absent additional research and data around what do we know right now could be explaining that 38%, which again, I think is pretty troubling.
Yep. Now, you mentioned a couple of times, and I do want to dig into that next, this idea of having to build consensus, the 5.4, the 6.8, I think we stopped counting at 11 like 2 years ago, but we'll see where that's at. Maybe we'll have a new number this year. Actually, let me direct this to Jen first. Like, Jen, as we think about managing large, diverse buying groups, you do it every day, but we've been doing it for years. Maybe a little bit easier in a live environment. I think we'd all agree, like, when we have live interaction, when we have the ability to meet with a group in person, we may have better luck facilitating group dialogue. Maybe not. I think one thing we've heard recently is it's hard to do a lot of that via Zoom. It's hard to do a lot of that virtually. Have you observed anything lately, Jen, in terms of not only struggles, but also potentially tactics or tact to use to try to continue the conversation, keep things moving forward when we've got 6 or 7 different stakeholders on a Zoom call?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just as a seller who's done a bunch of these group meetings virtually and then previously did them live, of course, we always prefer the live room, right? Because the attention is completely focused on you. It is utterly obnoxious if someone is sitting there on their phone. Not that they don't do it, but I think people are polite and kind and sort of self-aware. Whereas in a virtual environment, the fact that it is so easy for us to multitask and not get caught, I would say that's the one thing I think does make it potentially harder. But does it make it impossible? No, I think it really just raised the bar on us as sellers to say, I have to be so mindful of how I spend that time. Like, I just have to be so much more interesting. I have to listen so much more effectively. I have to do so much more preparation. So frankly, for me as a seller, sure, it's a little bit harder, but I think I'm a better seller as a result of it, because I recognize that if, let's say I do have 10 stakeholders and they're on a call and they have to buy into this thing, those 10 stakeholders probably have 10 different priorities. So I am up against 100 different priorities on a virtual call.
Yeah.
And if I don't have it absolutely nailed down, my questions, listening, doing all these kind of just like basic things that we used to get away with so much, those conversations don't net out well. And I will say, like to Matt's point before, you know, some of the bad behaviors that we had as sellers when things were really good just became so obvious to me. Like I lost 2 6-figure deals this year where, like Matt said, I did everything right? I was going through patting myself on the back, like I'm just doing everything by the book. But I got away from really simple things. Like I knew the dynamics of the buying group were off. I knew it was bad, but because there weren't as many leads coming in the door, my mindset was I have to make this a deal instead of going back to what I know is right, which is disqualify it early. Don't waste 3 months, put it in the pipeline, have to disappoint your manager. And so for me, I think it's just raised the bar on my preparation, how I involve different people in those meetings, and making sure that I truly understand that common thread between all of the stakeholders and poke at it as much as possible.
By the way, I do think that it's, let's not make life like Jen, I mean, Jen's speaking to this right now, but it's really hard to let go of those, a big deal that you've been spending a lot of time on. It's like, that is the sunken cost fallacy at work, right? You're not gonna, you know, even if every bone in your body tells you this is not gonna convert, I know there's something dysfunctional happening here, I'm not gonna get this customer to say yes, but they didn't say no, and I've already put so much time into this. And let's be honest, like, you know, salespeople, I think as a profession are optimistic, and they also love a, you know, no pun intended, they love a good challenge, right? And they love to be the underdog and to, you know, pull out the victory in the, you know, the 11th hour. But, you know, sometimes it's just not meant to be, and it takes a lot of discipline, a lot of guts, I think, to walk away from a deal that hasn't said no, just because, you know, based on your read and based on your experience, this is not a good spend of time. I could take every minute and every hour I'm spending in this opportunity, spend it on another one and increase that deal size, or move that one through faster, or go find another customer to sell to, right? It's really hard. I also like, you know, the comments you made, Jen, on Zoom. Somebody said to me recently, I thought this was pretty interesting, is that they think one of the big problems for sellers now is, like, you remember back in, it's just, we all used to work together back in the day, and we remember going to visit clients out in the field. It's, I mean, there are a lot of memories and a lot of stories about those experiences, right? Good and bad. And so I'm laughing because Jen and I are referring to a specific story, which I'm not going to retell right here, but particularly bad sales experience. But here's the thing, is that when you're physically there, it might go to what you're saying, like, there is a like an imprint on your memory about the office, about, you know, what you had for lunch, about the people and what they were wearing or what they said, about funny experiences that may have happened on the way on the road trip with your colleagues. That stuff, there is none of that now with Zoom. And so what ends up happening is, it's like everything is like grayed out. It's all the same. And it's really hard as a seller. Yes, we have CRM. Yeah, we have notes, but a lot of it, like, we recall that moment in the meeting where I remember the person leaned forward and I remember they crossed their arms at the specific time. You don't get any of that feedback on Zoom, and everything washes together. And you have a hard time remembering one sales meeting to the next and what really happened. And so, like you were saying, Jen, it's not just the level of preparation, I think, but it's also like amping up active listening, being fully dialed in and engaged in that conversation. Because here's the thing, we have a hard time remembering it. All the customers we're talking to have spent all day on Zoom, and they're gonna, you know, within 5 minutes of our demo being over, our sales meeting, they're gonna forget everything that happened. And so how do we create that feeling like that was the best call of the day? Like, that was, wow, I love talking to Jen. She was all in on the conversation. Like, it was this like mile a minute back and forth, and we were all in together. Like, I don't remember any of the other meetings I was on today, but that one I remember. Yeah. And then it puts a lot of onus on you as a seller to pick up on those, I think, not just things people say, which is kind of obvious, like, Jen, I think it's too expensive, or I'm worried about your ability to work with a company like ours, but those signs of what I might call implicit non-acceptance, which is like the way that people say things, not just that they said they think it's too expensive, but when you tell them the price and they respond with a, okay, like that. And like, like in their head, they're not gonna be able to get the budget. And so grab that meeting, right? There's the body language. You have more time together, but in a 30, 45-minute Zoom, it's really tough. You have to be all dialed in, completely engaged, and like picking up on every sound, every signal you're getting from that buyer.
Now, I want to stick on this topic of group consensus, and because I think at some point, like, look, hopefully we'll have the luxury of large group meetings back again as sort of standard operating procedure for complex purchase processes and sales cycles. Don't know when it's going to be, but hopefully that happens. Right? What's still going to be there, though? You guys have hit on it a couple of times. Group dysfunction, risk aversion, and this desire to spread risk out amongst a group. And you said it earlier, Matt, like, I'm happy to be part of the buying group. I just don't necessarily want my name in ink on that contract. Like, give me a little bit of the underlying psychology behind that risk aversion in a buying group setting.
Yeah, so I did a project recently for a company that manufactures lab equipment. They sell to hospitals and healthcare systems, and they had me go out and interview a bunch of their customers. It was interesting because what I found pretty quickly was, this is sort of roundabout answer to your question, Mike, but their reps, they give me a list of customers, they all had the same exact title. And what was interesting is I interviewed these folks, there's probably 30 customers, and even not knowing anything about what they sell and being like, knowledgeable enough to be dangerous, really. But just after a bit of dialogue with each of these customers, I could peg them as, this person's a mobilizer, this person's a talker, this person's a blocker, and I think I was probably 90% right, knowing nothing about their space. And what was interesting is that their reps kept going after the same person with the same title, the same words on their business card, the same sign outside their office. It was always the lab director. And that was who they sold to every day of the week and twice on Sunday. But what was interesting is that that's fine if that person's a mobilizer, but if they're not, you're barking up the wrong tree. And there may be somebody else, maybe that person's boss, it may be one of the senior technicians in the lab, it may be a specialty, somebody on the medical team, who knows? But you haven't found that person. And if you don't have that person, you can bet that when they're behind closed doors and they start to get pushback, which they will get, this is too expensive, we shouldn't switch suppliers, like, why don't we just buy from the guys we use today? Like, we're gonna have to retrain the staff, like that contract length seems too long, it's, so on and so forth. They get that pushback, they will shrink away from it if you don't have a mobilizer who's willing to really advocate for your solution and for the insight you brought to the table. So I think the problem I see a lot is that the mobilizer concept resonates with folks, but they find it tough to put into action because they just keep going back to the same title, the same box on the org chart. And they get this kind of radar lock that's really hard to break. So that was a lot of the work I did with this company is, look, you've got to take a much wider angle lens view on all these people are going to be involved in the buying committee, but who is the person you're going to put the baton in their hands who's going to bring this thing across the finish line? Do you really trust this person you're selling to right now, that they're going to stand up for you and stand up for this solution when the doors are closed and the pushbacks or the bullets start flying? Because they will start flying. And based on based on my interviews, I could tell you right now, some of these people are not going to stand up for you. So, I think that can be tough because it forces sellers into conversations they feel ill-equipped to have. Like, oh, you want me to go talk to the head of, in this case, the head of ancillary services, or the head of hospital tech procurement, or the CFO, or you want me to talk to the medical director? Like, I'm not a doctor, I can barely hold my own talking to a lab director. So it forces them a bit outside their comfort zone, but you got to go find that mobilizer, and they're not always the same person with the same title and the same set of responsibilities. So,
yeah.
I think I'm always reminded when we talk about mobilizer, just how important it is. And there's still a ton of people I think that don't even know about the challenger customer, the whole mobilizer theme.
it's more of a cult classic.
But But I think for me, what's really interesting, you talked about this before, this idea of effort. You're right. We always relate it to the customer service function, but in sales, there are so many opportunities that we have control over where we either dictate that effort, that level of effort for the mobilizer that we do find. And I find like jobs that are as simple as, okay, you've stood up, you said you will advocate for me. How easy or not easy do I as a seller make that job for you, right? It could come down to just asking, how are you planning on delivering that conversation? Is it a water cooler conversation? Is it a group meeting? Are you using slides? Are you not? Like, if we're always mindful of the effort, I think we make our customers' jobs easier. And you're right, that was a key point that came out in the Challenger research that we probably just don't talk enough about.
Yeah, I think there's, you're right, there's ample opportunity for us to think one step ahead for, I'm thinking of conversations we've had at my company, at Tether, when we think about selling our solution to our customers. And what we try to do is think one step ahead of like, okay, we've got our mobilizer, but it's not just that bullets are going to start flying, but what kind of bullets? What are they going to get pushed back on? Can we help the customer with some slides, or help inform them with some data they can put on their own slides, or at least just have that prep conversation about like, hey, we're pretty sure finance is going to push back in this way. I'm pretty sure security is going to push back in that way. Pretty sure IT is going to, want to build their own. So how are we going to deal with that pushback when it comes? Because it will. And just sharing a little bit of that and having almost like a little bit of a dry run session with their mobilizer lowers the risk of failure for that mobilizer, makes them feel better prepared, and even maybe take some work off their plate. I think you're 100% right. And sometimes we think, oh, they've got it. Like we found them, they're good. But I don't think they are. Again, they don't do this very often. So.
Yeah, I think it's a good pressure testing question, right? If someone refuses your help on that question, my red flag goes up. Are they really even going to have this conversation?
That's a disqualification sign for sure. Remember or do you maybe not really have a mobilizer? Remember the mobilizer identification tool? The last thing was put them to the test, ask them to do something for you, and maybe that's the thing, right? Let me help you prepare for this. Let me help you put some slides together. Let's just have a dry run conversation about how you're going to have that conversation with the buying committee. And to the extent that they don't want to do any of those things, maybe they look like a mobilizer or they sounded like a mobilizer, but they really aren't.
Yep. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit because there's one more sort of pain point, or I don't know if it's as much of a pain point as it is as just sort of an evolution of the Challenger approach over the years that I want to dig into. But it's one of the more common questions I think we get. And one of the things that we advise our clients on quite a bit, which is, and the question coming in is like, how do I do Challenger in an environment where we have role specialization across the commercial organization? So I'll clarify, right? Like, it used to be, perhaps, I think what we've seen in terms of role specialization across the last several years, it's really sort of accelerated, but it used to be that perhaps an individual contributor might have owned a little bit more across the entirety of the sales process and funnel, right? From scheduling the initial meeting to managing the entire journey to closing, and then perhaps even to retaining and growing accounts, right, in a hybrid model. What the question we often get is, well, how do I make sure I'm on the same page with my solutions engineer? How do I make sure that the conversations that are getting scheduled by the sales development rep are the ones that I want to be having as a sales executive, right? How do I make sure I'm on the same page with the CS rep that's going to be taking over the account once we close the deal? Like, so the question to you, Matt, is like, how do we, in these highly specialized role environments, like how do we do Challenger as an individual contributor seller?
Yeah, I have a view, which I don't know is going to be totally popular, but what I would say is I think that in a lot of organizations, there's salespeople have delegated or abdicated their responsibility for knowing their product to the sales engineer, the solutions engineer, the SME, or the product person. And we see this all the time. But I think there's a difference between, I'm not saying those specialty roles are unimportant, they play critical roles. But I think there's a big difference between, seller gets that product person on the phone. It's, hey, I want to introduce you to Bob. Bob, go ahead. There's a difference in that, which leads to this effect that you guys know really well, which is the salesperson gets delegated down to the person they sound like. And if you are not the person who sounds like they know anything about the solution or what it can do for the customer or the opportunity it addresses, you're at least not going to be maintaining that level of discourse with your mobilizer or with the senior most you're going to get delegated down. Suddenly you're just an admin who pulls together the people who actually really know what they're talking about for the calls that need to happen. But then you're pushing paperwork and your role is diminished. And you're not always going to be surrounded by those folks. And by the way, that's to say nothing about the expense of structures like that with so many layers of specialization. What I think been hearing from sales leaders is they're finding it much more important to hire for either product expertise or willingness to learn product. And I think you find that your best sellers you certainly do use those specialists. Like if I think about our company and we're selling an AI solution, at some point you're going to have to call the solutions engineer in who knows specifically how to get the data out of your system into our system, right? You're going to have to call the head of information security, who's going to have a conversation with their chief information security officer to talk to them about security stuff, right? But which is a level of detail you don't want an average. It's not a great spend of the average seller's time. But what I find is that our best sellers can carry that product conversation pretty far into the process before they have to like call in the reliever and bring in that specialist. And your average sellers are much more likely to abdicate early on. And I think one of the litmus tests here is to think about, how many sellers out there, think about a tech solution, for instance, how many sellers out there could demo the product on their own without a solutions engineer or product specialist there to do it for them? And I think the answer would probably frighten all of us. I think it's really low. And I think it's because salespeople have been taught that their job is to sell and work deals through the funnel. I don't need to know anything about the product. I just need to be there and I need to get the product person on the phone with them. But again, that does lead to this effect of like, you get delegated down to the person you sound like. I think ultimately what the customer's struggling with in these moments where you're starting to get deep on product is this question of like, do you know what you're talking about, or do I need to go do more research on this? And if you need to demonstrate that you do know what you're talking about, which requires a modicum of expertise. We also need to you need to convey it in a way that it's like, not only have I already read everything out there and I know all this stuff and I know the space, I know the market, but you can trust me not to lead you astray and get you to buy something that ultimately you don't really need. It's also, I think, counterintuitively a sign of building that trust when that salesperson can say, you know what, that's a great question. I don't actually know the answer to it. And there's a lot of overselling, especially in tech, that you see day in and day out where people get like the present and future tense confused when they're talking about what their product can do. Yeah. I think it's a great moment of credibility building to say, actually, our solution doesn't do that. That's on the roadmap, but I don't want to mislead you and say we're going to be able to do that if you buy tomorrow. I don't know the answer to your question. It's a great question. Let me go to the head of information security or go to our chief engineer and find out what the answer is for you. But like, how far down the funnel could you carry the deal yourself without having to pull in all kinds of subject matter experts? I guess is sort of a litmus test. And I hear from sales leaders a lot. They're looking to hire people who either have that expertise, maybe it's from the product side of the business or the customer success side of the business or the account managers or whoever it is in your organization, or people who are at least open to learning it and really are willing to roll up their sleeves and get to know that product at an intimate level of detail so that they can have a detailed conversation with the customer, up to a certain point, of course.
Right. I'm a big baseball fan, and we're approaching October. And I think of, as you're talking about this, you're trying to take it as far as you possibly can before turning it over to the specialist.
Yeah.
If you're an ace starting pitcher, you're getting through 7 innings before you go to your bullpen specialists in the 8th and 9th, right? Jen loves this one because she just knows everything. Yeah, highly relatable example. But
I'm a Mets fan, Mike. So thank you for bringing up the most painful part of the year.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So.
Well, yeah, point remains, try, as a starter, try to get as deep as you can without turning it over. And you also touched on, I think, the idea of credibility is something that Jen and I, when we're going through these very tactical themes and topics every single month on winning the Challenger Sale, a lot of it tends to come back to, frankly, the easy yet often overlooked stuff that we need to be doing as sales professionals. And a lot of that is just research, homework, preparation, intentionally building credibility by being forthright and honest about what you do and do not know. And when you position yourself as a credible authority through the lens of, I did my homework, I did everything I was expected to do or ever could be expected to do to learn about your business. I know I missed probably 20 to 30% of what I don't know about you until I get to talk to you. Tell me what I missed. Like, that is just a super tactical, easy but often overlooked and I think missed opportunity for a lot of sellers to instantly build credibility with a prospect or a customer in a conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jen, any other parting shots? I've got one more question for Matt that I want to use to kind of tee up another bonus episode we're going to do to mark the 10-year anniversary of the Challenger sale later this fall. But any other just thoughts or questions for Matt before we let him off the hook?
Have at it.
Okay, so 10-year anniversary coming up. I want to just let's take a quick trip down memory lane because I think we're going to do a lot of that across the next couple of months with you. To be
Great,
honest,
I just feel old enough. So
well, hey, I was there too, Jen. You know, we're all, it's good company.
yeah, you came to bring your kid to work day.
That was in, I think it was 6th grade at the time. Yeah, that was yeah.
Yeah, as a cat, unemployed.
Think back for a second when you're writing this book, or even before then, when you're conducting, I think, like, you know, the seminal research that underpins it, you didn't know it was going to turn into a book. Like, putting you on the spot, but are there any, you know, memories or moments or like inflection points when you think back, like that was really it, those aha moments when you were putting it all together, say this is going to be big? Was there anything that stands out here 10 years later?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, as you're asking this question, like memories that like come flooding back of that whole experience. And it was, you know, I think there are a few things that other folks, and many of whom work at Challenger, like Timur Hajimaz, who ran the quant research behind Challenger, actually is the person who coined the phrase Challenger, and which I'll talk about in a moment, which is no source of no lack of consternation around that naming. But I think, you know, a lot of it was like, I think it was a little bit like better to be lucky than good. There was a moment in time that I think we had started to track in the research. I think very similar to what we're talking about today about, hey, what's going on in this huge percentage of our deals? Customers go all the way through like a 6-month sales process and then don't make a decision. Like, what on earth is that all about? And I think that's just going to get worse. And so it's where you start seeing these things kind of percolating. Back then, it was the propensity of customers to be learning on their own and boxing the salesperson out and making a lot of assumptions about what that supplier can do for them without the salesperson there to inform that learning journey. And so we were already starting to hear frustration from back then our members, right, at CEB, heads of sales and marketing, about how the things, the tried and true approaches to sales and marketing just weren't working. They weren't yielding the returns they once did. And something was off. Something wasn't working. So we were tracking this. And I think the research happened at a moment in time where, you know, of course, you had the economy fall apart with the economic crisis or financial crisis. And so there were a lot of people actually, that problem of like, yeah, sales is not as productive as it used to be, suddenly became like a life or, you know, like a livelihood kind of issue and a survival issue. And so it thrusts us into the forefront of folks' minds as a business imperative they had to go solve. I think the fact that we took a quantitative approach to, candidly, a question, which is, what do higher performers do differently, which is often solved through, you know, or addressed through personal opinion. I mean, you guys see there are a lot of smart people out there opining about what they think salespeople should do, but it's not based on a lot beyond their personal experience. Not to make light of their personal experience, but that's a sample of one, right? When you bring thousands and thousands of data points to bear and you use science to study something that's historically been studied by or analyzed through anecdote and metaphor and, you know, personal experience, it's different and it shakes things up. And I think it gained a lot of credibility there really quickly for that reason. I think, in addition, you guys know this very well, I'm not a salesperson, I just write about sales. But I think because of that we were researchers, not you know, salespeople who had been doing this for years. And here's, you know, me and Brent talking about what worked for us in our careers. Like, we were just researchers. And so we brought a powerful lens, a database lens, with Timur's help, to study this. And what we found was very counterintuitive. So I think put all those things together and you ended up with a recipe for success and something that really resonated with the market. The last thing, I'll come back to the naming. So Timur will remember this, but he came up with this term Challenger. I remember looking at the first output of the quantitative research, and he had put these names against the profiles. I think all of those names ended up holding. The big debate, if you guys, I'm really going to date myself now. The big debate about Challenger was that would it remind people of the space shuttle disaster? So that was literally like what we were worried about. So So you fast forward then to it comes out, and I think you put all these things together, right moment in time, the old approach not working. These non-salespeople, they're researchers, came to study our profession with data, and what they found was totally different. And then the final, I think, thing that sort of tipped it over the crossed the chasm really quickly and propelled it was the naming, actually. And I think it was in itself provocative, and it grabbed people's attention. And I think it was seen as, I mean, there are a lot of people out there who still to this day don't like the term and don't like the concept, but in many respects, it does what we tell our readers to do. It does what you tell your customers to do, which is, if the customer's reaction to what you're saying is, yeah, you guys are very smart, they're not listening to anything you're saying. You need them to lean forward and say, whoa, I've never heard that before. You must be kidding. And there were a lot of people who invited me and Brent to come in and visit with them and tell them about the research, who only invited us in so they could tell us we were full of it, but they still met with us. And that's the thing, like, you want to be out there shaking the, as Brent would say, put a dent in the universe and really grab people by the lapels and shake them. I remember we went to call on, I will not mention who this is, but if he is listening to this webinar, he knows, who I'm talking about you. So Brent and I brought a copy, went to go visit a head of sales and marketing from one of the biggest companies in North America. And we had fought tooth and nail to get the time. The salesperson from CEB brought us in. We came in, handed the person a signed book. He had already read it, but gave him a personal book. He was thankful for that. But then he said, I really, I got to tell you, I don't love this term challenger. Why? Because I read the book, and really what you guys are talking about is building a new kind of customer relationship, one founded on business value, not just being reactive and likable and generous with your time. I get it. Why didn't you just call it the new relationship builder? That seems way more agreeable. Like, well, did you really have to call it challenger? And I said, well, if we called it the new relationship builder, you wouldn't have read the book. And he said, you know what? You're probably right. So, but and I'm not suggesting, like, it's almost like effortless experience. People come to the end of that book and they're like, wait, you're saying that we should delight our customers, but we should delight them by making it surprisingly easy. It's like, exactly, but that wrapper and the messaging is so important, the breaking through in a world of, like, we're trying to schedule visits and our customers get thousands of emails and cold calls a day. And, like, what is that thing that's just going to, like, grab them in a way that they haven't seen before, that's going to make them want to meet with us, even if their only intention is to tell us they disagree. Still getting in front of them, and you're going to be able to convince some of those people they're wrong. So
yeah, it always was about the counterintuitive truth, right? And just taking that lens to things. I think, a decade since the book was released, right? The impact on the world of B2B selling and sales strategy. I think I think a lot of folks watching, tuning in, listening here are super appreciative for essentially providing a blueprint for how to navigate what's been a hell of a decade.
yeah,
ups and downs, and yeah.
And the appreciation goes both ways. I mean, I've learned more about this being out on the road and talking to sales and marketing leaders and sales professionals and managers about how, candidly, about how hard this is to get it right and how it's evolving, as we've been talking about in this discussion. And so I appreciate that people read it and that they want to give feedback and they want to push the dialogue. And I think it was really just the beginning. I think you guys are uncovering some really fascinating data out there in the market, and we're going to have to continue to evolve how we think about not just challenger, but what are those new skills and what are those new approaches that we layer on so we can meet the challenges of selling to today's customer.
That's right. I think, yeah, with every major disruption comes a significant opportunity. So I think let's look ahead to the future, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again here in the coming weeks as we commemorate 10 years since the initial release. But thank you so much for your time today, Matt. Always a pleasure. We'll talk soon. Thank you.